Greetings, students. Mr. Little here. And today we're going to look at practicing HIPP statements, sometimes known as HIPPO statements, sometimes also known as CAP statements. These are the ways you analyze primary source documents on a DBQ. And so today we're going to look at what's called a Byobu, which is essentially like a gigantic screen, which was a very popular thing in East Asia. Still is very popular in East Asia for most of history. In particular, we're going to look at one that was made in Japan in the 1700s, but that depicts the Battle of Nagashino, which took place in 1575 and helped bring an end to the Warring States period of Japan. Now, you do not have to know anything about the Battle of Nagashino. All you need to really know is that it helped end the Warring States period of Japan and ushered in the Tokugawa shogunate, which ruled Japan until the arrival of the Europeans. That's all you really need to know. I can tell you that the Battle of Nagashino was really a really big turning point because the future ruler of Japan, Oda Nobunaga and Tokugawa Ieyasu, one of them might have been there, I don't remember if they were both there, utilized gunpowder to defeat a far larger superior force and secure their rule over much of Japan. It took place outside of a location called Nagashino Castle. Now, this sample that you're seeing here, this is actually only 2 screens. There's actually 7 screens that depict the entire battlefield, but that won't fit on the screen here. So we're only going to take a look at these 2. And let's zoom in a little bit, shall we? So here is a slightly close-up of the right side of the screen. And here we can see the forces of the opponent of Nobunaga and Ieyasu on horseback, simply being, if you look, it looks like they're being just trampled on and defeated. A lot of horses are falling over. You can see banners falling on the ground. So even if you don't know anything about Nagashino, that's okay. You can definitely see here, it looks like the side with the horses is getting beaten pretty badly. Fallen banners, people dying, horses falling over, not looking good. If we look at the right side, we zoom in and we can see what looks like a very well-organized group. It looks like there's maybe some fortifications here. And these little sticks, if you look closely, those actually look like firearms. And they are firearms. The Battle of Nagashino is really interesting because it's one of the first instances in Asia of firearms being used in unison, like they would be used in Europe. And they were used to defeat a far larger cavalry force. The commanders on this side had set up their firearms, their firearm units behind fortifications. So that even when the cavalry charged them, they would be able to stay behind their fortifications and shoot the cavalry down. Now, that may seem a little silly, but I should, just to get a little deeper into the weeds, their opponents of this battle, I'm forgetting the name of the Japanese lord that was fighting Ieyasu and Oda Nobunaga. He had actually beaten Ieyasu several years earlier using this tactic of charging. Even though he was charging into gunfire, the power of the horses had scared away the gunners. And so this tactic actually had worked once before. It just didn't work at Nagashino. And this defeat eventually allowed Nobunaga, and then after Nobunaga was assassinated by a rival, Ieyasu, to eventually unify Japan and end the Warring States period. So if we take this Byobu, this screen, this really large screen, everything that we see in it, and you are asked to write a HIPP statement about it, here are some things that you can take into account. So one of the things to not jump to the conclusion of is just because the events depicted on the screen take place in the late 1500s, the document itself is actually created in the 1700s. And so you want to be careful about when you're looking at documents that you double check when they were made versus perhaps the thing they're talking about, right? So while the Battle of Nagashino took place during the Warring States period in Japan, I believe it's called the Sengoku period, this screen was actually created about 100 years after that had ended. And so this is actually a time of peace, right? And so the context is that this battle was actually starting to fade from living memory, whereas it's probably was being kept alive through stories and rituals, hence why it is probably being depicted on this screen. So it's always important, look at the dates when doing historical context. Now, the intended audience. This screen and screens like it were definitely designed for upper classes. This is a luxury item. This was not for everybody, right? Nowadays, you might see this in a museum where everybody could look at it. That was not the case back then. This took a lot of time to make. So this is definitely something that would have been an upper class house, and only honored guests, important visitors, maybe foreigners or Europeans, maybe the shogun himself, who became the ruler of Japan after the battle, would have seen this. So perhaps it was designed to placate. Perhaps it was designed to have people be in awe and wonder of it. But regardless, the intended audience would be lords, and this was designed to impress. This was not meant to just be something to kind of fill space. This was designed to be looked at and to impress when sitting in a room. Something to keep in mind there. The point of view. So the point of view is not the people in the battle. In this case, the point of view is the artist who created this piece of work. And so if we look at it, it's very clear that the artist sought to portray the drama of the battle. If you go back and look at any of this, while it does look dramatic, right, there's no blood, right? We know from the records of Nagashino, the field was actually very muddy, right? And so, but it looks green and kind of cool and collected, right? There's no blood, there's no mud. All the grossness that real life battle brings with it is not here, right? You do see some smoke. So there's a little bit of an acknowledgement that this is an action scene, right? But it seems like the artist who created this was definitely going for the drama of the battle. And this is probably because they didn't live during the time of the battle. Very, very likely they lived after the battle. And so they see it in a more poetic light than it actually might have been seen at the time. Now, they aren't looking at it strategically. They're looking at it like poetically, right? And so purpose, right? Now, I'm going to state up front, and as I always like to remind students, not every document is good for every HIPP statement, right? Some HIPP statements work better with certain documents than others. And I don't think this is a very good purpose. Like, this is not a good document to do purpose with, right? I would argue, though, if you are going to attempt purpose, that the argument that the purpose of this document was to demonstrate the military prowess of its owner, probably a lord, a daimyo. Now, daimyo were military leaders, although during the Tokugawa shogunate, there was not so much military action. But nonetheless, they were also known to be leaders, military leaders. So this is probably a daimyo lord seeking to demonstrate his military prowess because, hey, look, I own a screen that demonstrates one of the most decisive battles of the Warring States period, right? And the purpose of this may have been to dissuade any visitors from challenging his authority, whether they were other lords, maybe foreigners, and they would report on their visit. Perhaps the purpose of this was to convince others not to challenge this lord militarily, right? If you challenge me, I will defeat you in battle. Look, I know all about the Battle of Nagashino. I have it here in my house, right? Now, again, I always tell students the purpose is never to simply tell someone, right? The purpose of this document is not to just tell people about the Battle of Nagashino. It's a course of action. I will make the case that the course of action here was a lord attempting to dissuade a possible challenge to their authority from foreign visitors, possibly other lords, whatever it could have been. There are a number of other ways you could have possibly looked at this, other ways to argue the audience or the point of view. But these are just the ways I have chosen to go about doing it. And I would encourage you every time you look at an image to think about what are some of the context, audience, point of view, and purpose that could apply to this, but also to always read it carefully, especially when it comes to that historical context. Do read it carefully. I hope this has helped you out a little bit. My name is Mr. Little. I want to thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.